are Nun Gimal, Seif Gimal, Seif Dalet really, we finished Seif Gimal. Shaliach Tzibur Sarich Sheyeh Hagun ve'ezo Hagun Sheyeh Rekan Ma'averot. Shaliach Tzibur, again, Siman Nun Gimal is about the halachot of Shaliach Tzibur, and you can't just put anyone up there as Shaliach Tzibur. It has to be, like the Gemara said, we learned this in Ta'anit Daf Tetzayin together, that Shaliach Tzibur has to be a person that's Hagun. What is Hagun? Says the Shulchan Aruch, ve'ezo Hagun Sheyeh Rekan Ma'averot. Hagun means he's empty from averot, and not only now he's empty from averot, but shelo yatsa alav shem ra afilu b'yalduto, that he doesn't have a bad name following him even from his childhood. He's been a proper personality, and not only that, the sheyeh anav umerutze la'am, he has to be a humble individual that people love. And he has a proper tune, and he has a pleasant voice that people like and enjoy. And he is a person that is accustomed to learn. Says Torah, Nevi'im, and Ktuvim at the very least. You find this, by the way, by a shochet as well. One of the very unprecedented things that a shochet has to have, shochet is a person that does shchita. So I would say he has to know Hilchot Shchita very well, which is the halacha, right? Others say that he has to review the halachot of shchita every 30 days. Not every 30 years, but every 30 days. He has to know, was proficient in halachot of shchita. There is a person that does shchita here and there, and is not a proper personality, should not be doing shchita. And I didn't know this because he's a friend of the family and so on. And when Rabbanim asked me to look into it, I spoke to him in Hilchot Shchita, and he hadn't looked at the Hilchot Shchita for 30 years maybe. I completely forgot everything. I first started asking him, Sheyah b'miut batra, machloket rishonim, Rabbeinu tam, this. There's nothing. He even didn't remember and know the basic 5 psulim of shchita. Right? He's not allowed to do shchita. No way. But one of the unprecedented things that are in the shchita is that shochet has to be baki in chavdalet sifrei Tanakh. At machloket, why does a shochet have to be a baki in Tanakh? Right? In Torah, Nevi'im, and Ktuvim, and one of the things that are said is because it gives you yirat shamayim. When you read, one of the best musar sfarim is going through Nevi'im. Just go through the Sefer Shoftim, Shemuel Aleph, Melachim. Tremendous musar that the person learns from the history of the world and the way everything is governed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, gives a person a proper yirat shamayim, and that's of course very important for a shochet, and is important for a shaliach tzibur as well. So that was one of the arguments, but you have to understand that many people. First of all, this individual also did shchita for behemah, and that for sure people are eating. You should know his name. Yes, when it's not on record, I'll say it. But there was actually publicized. The decision was by the Va'ad Rabbanim to publicize his name, and it was done in a way that would not damage his family in that way, but at the same time to create awareness for people. That's why Va'ad Rabbanim is there. You have to understand, again, with all the discussions that there is, and with all the considerations, at the end of the day, their job is to inform the public of things that could be relied upon, things that can't be relied upon, to create a standard, an objective standard for the community is the job of the Va'ad. So that's by itself a whole other question. I'm not getting into, I realize that it's a can of worms. If we open that, that's for a shiur for itself, of kaparot, doing kaparot, not doing kaparot, is it going to be eaten, it's not going to be eaten. Kisui Adam, others, a lot of questions to be asked and answered there, but just saying that this is an element that you find that it gives a shaliach tzibur needs to have that level of yirat shamayim that you find by a shochet as well, by being ragil likrot Torah Nevi'im uchtuvim. Now Mishna Berurah writes on this The reason that he has to be a person that is proper, a tzaddik, is because the pasuk says in Yirmiyah Navi in Perek Yud Bet, Natna alai bekolah al ken senetia. He raises his voice to me, which means like shaliach tzibur that raises. But if he's not a proper person, the pasuk says al ken senetia, I hate him. So it's not a good thing. The Amru Chazal, the Gemara in Ta'anit Aftet Zayin Amud Bet says, Zeh shaliach tzibur. This pasuk in Yirmiyah is a reference to a shaliach tzibur she'eno hagun, a shaliach tzibur that's not a proper individual for carrying the mantle of the tzibur and for being their agency in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kaf Chaim writes that not only he does not invoke midat harachamim on the tzibur as their shaliach, but rather he is mehapech. He turns midat harachamim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu chas v'shalom to midat adin. So that's like it's very serious stuff. Basically, it says the Kaf Chaim over here is not a joke, and that's why it's merumaz belashon nekeva. It says lashon nekeva is midat adin. Gets into a little bit of a kabbalistic background, the Kaf Chaim, and he adds also that shaliach tzibur has to be very careful not to speak between the tefillah of lachash and chazarat shaliach tzibur. People don't realize that, again, for individuals also there are restrictions of what you do, but for shaliach tzibur, that tefillah chazara is his main tefillah. He cannot speak between finishing his own private Shemona Esrei and davening, starting the tefillah of chazarat shaliach tzibur. There are many restrictions and many halachot for shaliach tzibur, as we're going to discuss, and this is one of them that perhaps is less known to the public, and Kaf Chaim brings this as well. And you have to be very careful that a person that can't control himself and is not careful in this element, says the Kaf Chaim, do not make him shaliach tzibur. So the Mishna Berurah continues in this. Tremendous amount of literature, says the Chafetz Chaim, on tzibur that appoints a shaliach tzibur, an agent that's not proper. You can't do it, and there's so much that has been written about this. Ki mon'im ali dezeh tov miYisrael. Whoever appoints a shaliach tzibur that's not hagun is preventing good from Klal Yisrael, and the Kaf Chaim writes on that the Gabaye Bet Knesset, Manhigei HaKahal, those who have the power in their hands to do this, they have to do all the decisions based on a Hacham. They have to be based on Dat Torah, because there are halachot involved. It's not just a political, this guy gives to the shul, or that guy is politically powerful, and this guy is good looking, and that guy is like this. That's not what determines the shaliach tzibur. This is a Torah institution, every Bet Knesset, and therefore it has to be based on Dat Torah. And if you don't find a shaliach tzibur that has all of the requirements that are counted in this Seif, in this Siman rather, you have to at least know what is the priorities, and the discussion with the Tamei Hacham is required to determine which person would be a proper shaliach tzibur. Again, this has become more of a difficult thing when you have shuls, especially shuls that are more like a factory, minion factory, that people come go and there are multiple minyanim. It becomes harder to make sure that every shaliach tzibur is a proper personality and fits the bill, so to speak, of a shaliach tzibur. But nevertheless, it is something important to keep in mind. Kaf Chaim also adds in the name of Sefer Hasidim that the people who are somech to the shaliach tzibur, for instance, you have on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yamin Uraim, we have people who are somchim, they stand and they help the shaliach tzibur in his job. They also are important, and he says if you have a shaliach tzibur she'eno hagun, and there are people who vouch for him, even though that he's not proper, those people are included in that as well. And he writes, Chas v'shalom, atidin nitenet adin, as they're going to be accountable for keeping the good from the tzibur. Again, this is something that you see. Unfortunately, nowadays we don't think about it like that. As the Gemara says, the tefillah is dvarim haomdim berumo shel odam ubenei adam mezalzelim bahem. That tefillah is the highest level of power that we have, and yet people disgrace it because we have it daily 3 times, so we don't think that this is like nuclear power. But the Gemara makes it pretty clear that this is what we've got, right? This is what we've got to the degree that you have answering Ameni Yeshemer Rabbah. Like you don't hear shuls, and this should happen here. You don't hear shuls that when you say Ameni Yeshemer Rabbah, the windows shake. But it should be like that. Everyone that answers it with all the kavanah and out loud, nice, beautiful. Even if he has a negative gezardin paskin and decided and signed and sealed on him for a whole lifetime, they'll rip it apart. That's power. And that's like one part of the tefillah, right? The tefillah is something very powerful. Therefore, we see this when we see these things, we think it's radical. Well, who cares? The shach is a little bit like this, a little bit like that. But it is important because, again, you don't put just anybody in the cockpit of a plane when you're flying, right? You want to make sure that the guy knows really what he's doing, and he's perfect. And this is the same thing when you're flying the most powerful plane that we have, carrying the tefillot to Shamayim, and that is something that we have to be mindful as well. Says the Mishna Berurah. It's a long. We're still in Seif Katan Yud Gimal now. Hagun v'ra'ui sheyu bigdei shaliach tzibur arukim shelo yira'u raglav. A shaliach tzibur should have long clothing that covers their body. Their body should not be exposed when they stand by the amud. So he's talking specifically about shorts. You should not be wearing short pants, becoming the shaliach tzibur. That's not bekavod, right? We'll get to that. So it says, again, Rabbi Chaim Palaji writes that that the person that is davening as the shaliach tzibur of the kahal, he is basically, if you are a proper shaliach tzibur that knows how to daven and has all the criterias of a proper shaliach tzibur, then you don't need malachi. She'ein hu tzarich malachim umilitzim letfilato. He doesn't need a malach or a militz. El azchut harabim tesayato le'afik ratzon ma'Hashem. And he brings from Chesed La'alafim, from Eliezer Papa, the author of Pnei Yoetz. He writes that it is incumbent upon the shaliach tzibur you have to have a certain awe and reverence when you come to, and you realize that you've been chosen as the agent of Sibur to stand in front of Hashem and ask on their behalf. That's a tremendous thing. And you have to say, Hashem, we say every individual says Hashem sfatay tiftach, Hashem open my mouth, that this mouth that may have said avak lashon hara, may have said sheker, may have said other things, it should only be open for your tefillah. Says the Chesed La'alafim should daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there should be a proper agency, and the averot that you have done should not become a blockage between Hashem and His people, Am Yisrael, whom you are representing. So again, this is a different mindset than what we have, and it's important to have drills, certain drills for shaliach tzibur of all the basic halachot of having everyone in mind when you say kedusha and Ameni Yeshemer Rabbah and chazarat hashas and all the brachot that they're saying that other people may need to be yotzeh with and so on, which some of which we're going to discuss going forward. No, that's conceptual. He's saying, Chassalafim is saying that in order to be a proper connection between Hashem and His people, you have to be pure. So you have to have a certain awe and reverence that, maybe I'm not pure enough, maybe because of my personal averot, I'm not a good agent to stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on behalf of His people, and that's I'm going to be causing more trouble than not. So again, or at least the mindset. So it says the Kaf HaChaim, Kaf HaChaim writes, Kaf HaChaim Sofer, that the shaliach tzibur should be very careful not to have even any other hirhur inside the tefillah. Don't think about your business and your other worldly activities. The Shliach Tzibur has to be pure. Again, that's hence the importance of who is going to be Shliach Tzibur. And again, as far as we may feel our generation is from these details of halachot versus the time of Kaf HaChaim, but these are important. If there is the teaching and the education of these halachot, then you will end up with better Shliach Tzibur. And when a person does become Shliach Tzibur, is at least more mindful. You know, there's the famous story with the Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer assumed a Baal Tokea. Baal Tokea is very important. Who blows the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is tremendous, right? All the things that are accomplished, the main mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is shofar. The shofar. So who does it? It's very important. There's sodot, deep things of mystical items in the mitzvah of Tekiyat shofar. So he of course wanted someone that was proper. And he taught him all the kavanot, and he wrote it on a piece of paper for him to review it and to have it in front of him when he blows the shofar, that this tkiyah, you have this kavanah, the shvarim, this one, the shvarim tru'ah, this one, all the kavanot. And this Shliach Tzibur, Erev Rosh Hashanah, he lost this paper. Comes Rosh Hashanah, he can't find it. He was broken. He was broken like Khatam Sofer, the Gadol Ador. And he comes in the morning and he was crying. It was like really broken. It was, I says, wow, what, Mayesh? He said, I lost the paper. Sofer said, look at the genius of the Gadol Ador. He says to him, he says, don't worry. You see, there are two ways of getting in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Kisar Kavod. One way is there are different doors and gates, and you have to have a different key for each one of them. So I gave you the keys, right? All the kavanot, this one opens this one, that one opens that one. But then there's somebody that has an axe and could just break through every door and every lock, and that's Lev Nishbar. Someone that has a broken heart, that you, the way you feel right now, that there's so much kavanot and you're not going to know any of them. There's so much to be known, and you realize that you're not going to remember all the things that I gave you. That Lev Nishbar in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like an axe. It can break everything, and you're going to stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So sometimes just know how complicated it is to become Shaliach Tzibur. When a person becomes Shaliach Tzibur, Hashem Yirachem. Hashem, I don't have any of the things that Shaliach Tzibur should have. Please have Rahmanut on your people. But again, that's the very least. But at at the reality level, this is an education that we have to learn how important it is to become Shliach Tzibur and also to appoint proper Shliach Tzibur. Now, in Sefer Shevet Musar, it says that Shliach Tzibur has to be a happy person. At a time, especially at the time that he stands there, if a person is not happy, Sameach v'tov lev, his good heart with internal happiness, he can't represent, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not connect with a person that's depressed. Now, being sad and crying on Yom Kippur, still, I always say, it's like we say in Sha'arei Ratzon, say, Ayin b'mar bocha v'lev sameach. You could have the eyes shedding tears and the heart is happy. The heart of a person has to always be happy, right? You never, any yush, you cannot fall into despair. Shliach Tzibur, who's representing Klal Yisrael in front of Hashem, should also be always happy, because without happiness, Hashem does not reside with someone that is not in the level of simchat halev, of deep and internal happiness. So there's a lot to be talked about this, but nevertheless, we go on, we do what we do. We have to cover some ground over here. So says Mishna Berurah, Shliach Tzibur has to be hagun, has to be proper. As we said, you shouldn't stand with short pants there as the Shliach Tzibur. Now, Rabbi Shalom, he had the tshuva about the kibbutzniks in Eretz Yisrael. Right? You go to Eretz Yisrael, many people walk around with short pants their whole life, right? The kibbutzniks, they're all like that. It's not considered disrespectful. They will go in front of the prime minister also like that. That's how they dress. So Avadia says it's this whole question: if a person like that, forget about Shaliach Tzibur, if he could even daven, is not so pashut. But certainly, the Gemara says a poheach cannot stand to daven as a shaliach tzibur. The pocheach is questionable in the Rishonim. What exactly means? Is it someone that has a ripped shirt and his arms are showing, or is someone that his legs are showing because his pants is cut or whatnot? So Chacham Obadia, in Yechavedad, in Chazon Obadia, in Yebia Omer, he wrote several times that even a short sleeve is not a proper dress code for the Shaliach Tzibur. Now, of course, in the spectrum of the Jewish practice, you have many communities who have a standard that the Shaliach Tzibur has to have jacket, black hat, and jacket, like the most proper dress code. Again, black hat comes from the European. Even they had it in Iran as well. My grandfather, Al Shalom, he never went anywhere official without the black hat. Because that was the dress code, right? They also had a cane. Some of them was like even though they were not old people, but cane was like the way you presented yourself, either a cane or a cane umbrella, right? Not forget about that, but they had a proper dress code. So you have that, but the question is, what's the minimum? Chacham Obadia says short sleeves, short pants, not good, right? And that comes from the Gemara. It's asur to stand in front of the teva being shaliach tzibur. Now, I wrote a piece once many years ago to show that it's not simple. The maskana of Chacham Obadia, Mikar Adin perhaps is not correct, and a short sleeve that has been manufactured that way. It's not a ripped clothing. It's manufactured to be worn like this. It's not a disrespectful thing. Yeah, you could have a T-shirt if you buy it from one of those holy stores on Rodeo Drive. It could cost you thousands of dollars. And it's manufactured to be like that. I'm not talking about the ripped pants that are in. That's disrespectful and distasteful. But nevertheless, Chacham Obadia, Rabbi Shalom is machmir. Once he said it, kivar hora zaken, and that should be the halacha. But nevertheless, the mekomot sheregilim in places like Eretz Yisrael, the kibbutzes, that they always walk with short pants like that. It's considered accepted norm of a dress code. Chacham Obadia says that still Shaliach Tzibur should not do it, even though that's accepted. And Mikar Adin, maybe there is what to be relied upon, but says still you should not do it. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu seems to have held the same way, that Shaliach Tzibur is already a higher level. Someone comes with the shorts and flip-flop in the shul. That's not a good representation. It's not bekavod. Even though that it's in a season or in a place that this is considered norm out in the street, still would not be proper for serving as shaliach tzibur. Now, how about the head covering, right? So Chacham ben Sion Abba Shaul alav shalom, who was the chavruta and the best friend of Chacham Obadia, he writes, his students write in his name, that in a place that people are accustomed to go in the street with a kova, with a hat, which again, about 70, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, that was the norm in America, in Europe. The proper official dress code was a jacket and a hat, even for the goyim we're talking. So Rabbi Shlomo writes, in a place that's the norm, or in a community of Bnei Torah that everyone has a hat and black hat and jacket, right? It's not a matter of timeline, it's a matter of the community. If you live in a community that everyone, their official clothing is black hat and a jacket, so then, writes Chacham ben Sion Abba Shaul, you cannot bring a shaliach tzibur up to the teva without a black hat. That's the minimum respect. It has to be the highest level of norm in the community, right? So you have places in Lakewood, in East Coast communities, whole communities, that the norm of the community for an official attire is a suit and a hat, just like it was before. Now again, this started because they kept what it was in Europe, right? Now some people say, well, why do we have to do it like? No, you don't have, but it has become like that because it's a proper cover. It's a respectful dress code, and also covers the fact that you have to have what we're going to get into Siman Tzadi Aleph, which we already discussed, or in Siman Bet as well earlier on, of Kisui Rosh. That's Lachatchila. A person should have a cover on their head that covers the majority of the circumference of their head, hence a large yarmulke or a hat. But it used to be a hat, right? Both in Sephardi countries and Ashkenazi countries. Sephardi countries, they just didn't have the brim. right?
The double cover.
It's a good question you're asking for the Taz and others of discussing a second cover, but nevertheless, let's not get into the complexity of that. But the Maaseh, they had this in all across. Like, someone told me like black hat is Ashkenazi, it's not Ashkenazi. My grandfather wore black hat, and my great grandfather had a Sephardi hat, which is the hat without the brim, right? The tall, hats and stuff like this. Sfaradim had that in Turkey, in Iran, in Bukhara, in Syria. In Iraq, all the Middle Eastern countries, that was their normal dress code, right? The Jews, for sure, they had a head covering of that nature. So we always go with the highest level of official proper dress code. So says Chacham Ben Zion, therefore, you should have a proper head covering when you are then you're becoming a shaliach tzibur, and if the standards of the tzibur is to have a jacket and a black hat, so that should be kept for that community. Again, in a community that you don't have it, like here, not majority is not walking around with that. So then, without the hat, also finds no obligation of having a black hat for the shaliach tzibur, because that's not what's accepted in this specific community here. ומקומות שהנהיגו בהם שאשר עצמו לראש בית התפילה מגוון ובגדים שחורים הדומים לבגדי הכומרים, הגאון רבי עובדיה יוסף כתב שאפילו יש קצת שינוי בין בגדיו לבגדיהם, אין לו לעבור. So again, this gets into a different question of having specific clothing for the Hazan, right? So the Christians have specific clothing for their kumar when they stand to officiate something, and to have chazanim that have something very similar to that, Chacham says that's not correct. You get into borderline of chukot akum and darkei morit. Therefore, that should not be done. You just want a clean, nice, proper, modest attire, which is accepted as respectful in the respective communities that you have. That's all. To make it like the goyim, that already is going towards a wrong direction. And Bezat Hashem will continue this halachot in days to come.